Hawaii is one of only 10 states where the two candidate outsiders posted easy caucus wins. Locally, Trump and Sanders supporters took control of the state conventions. What does that say about the mood of Hawaii's electorate? What's driving the momentum in key local races? Is this the beginning of a political shift in Hawaii politics? Join us for the first of our series of live broadcasts covering the 2016 election on Insights on PBS Hawaii. That's coming up next. Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Mahialani Richardson. Whether we follow politics and vote in elections or not, we all have a stake in this process. And that's why we hope you will participate in tonight's program. You can email, call, or tweet your questions and comments. And you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org. Join us for our first election 2016 edition of Insights. Our guest now. Tim Vanderveer is the chair of the Democratic Party of Hawaii and is a third-year student at the William S. Richardson School of Law at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Wayne Yoshioka is a political reporter for Hawaii Public Radio. He's also covered news for print publications and television. David Chang is the former chair of the Hawaii Republican Party and the Republican National Committee. When elected, he was the youngest state party chair in the country and the first Korean American to hold that office. And Spencer Oshita is the current editor-in-chief of Kaleo o Hawaii, the student newspaper for the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He's studying American studies and political science. Let's start by taking a look at the results of both party caucuses held in March. Just under 34,000 people voted in the Democratic caucus, and Bernie Sanders won nearly 70% of all the votes, easily defeating Hillary Clinton. And at the Republican caucus, just over 13,000 votes were cast, and Donald Trump beat Ted Cruz with 10% more votes and a strong showing on the neighbor islands. Now for the millennials, adults 18 to 34 years old were a strong force in the state primaries and caucuses here across the country, particularly in support of Bernie Sanders. One young woman gave us her reasons for getting involved.
I think a lot of it has become personal, especially when it comes to reproductive justice or gay marriage. We see that that's our friends, that's us, like these issues affect us personally. And when you think of it that way, you're more inclined to sort of vote and put yourself out there and really do your civic duty because you see the long-term effects. Like we see what voting can actually do, and we've seen it in our lifetime, we've seen it in our parents' lifetime, and I think it makes us more inclined to actually get out there and kind of rally around things we really believe in.
Well, again, I wanted to welcome all of our guests tonight. And Spencer, I'm going to put you on the spot because you're the lone representative of the millennials tonight. So what did you make of the Bernie Sanders win here? And what do you think is going to happen in the upcoming election?
Well, I think a lot of millennials are very concerned with the future that we're facing. A lot of people are going into college with massive amounts of debt. They're coming out and, can't find jobs for a lot of the majors that are going out there. That compounded with how the climate change issue has been sort of finding its way into the political spectrum, and just the way that, a lot of government transparency has been brought to the spotlight. It really is, I think, a lot of issues that are, like she said, it's starting to become very personal. This is about our future. And so I think there's, quite a lot of people in the millennial generation, so to speak, that feel as if, we should be out there using our voice to, really let people know, the people who are representing us, the people who are not our age, how we feel, what we feel, and what we're willing to do about that.
Tim, you saw the Bernie Sanders supporters, feel the burn. They were really burning for this election. Do you think that they're going to transfer over to Hillary Clinton or just stay away from the races?
It's a good question. I think what this election did in Hawaii and all across the nation was activate a tremendous amount of voters, new people that hadn't necessarily been engaged in the Democratic Party before, but people that share progressive ideals. Bernie Sanders supporters don't have a monopoly on progressive ideals, but I think to Spencer's point, what we're seeing in many ways is 2008. playing out still in our politics, and young people being affected by the Great Recession, these issues hitting close to home. And while President Obama has done remarkable things to put our country back on the right track, you have to have a Congress that's willing to participate. And young people realize that they've got to get more involved in their local politics to make sure that we're not faced with obstructionism and indifference on the part of our government, and that we're actually taking an active role in making it work.
David, how do local Republicans feel about Donald Trump? Because you've either got supporters or some people are really uncomfortable.
I think definitely strong emotions, or that's one way I could describe those who support or are against Donald Trump. I think overall, though, and I even see this with Bernie Sanders, those are not traditional candidates where you see experienced people like Hillary or Jeb Bush that we thought would really just win hands down, but we see people, I think they're not satisfied with the status quo. They want to say, we don't believe we're on the right track, and we want to shake up the system, for lack of a better term, and make sure that, are we going to be competitive in today's world? I just got back from China for a couple months ago, and it's amazing what they're doing over there. And U.S., we're right now the lone superpower, but it's a matter of time if we don't have good education system, we don't have good legislation, good leadership, we could lose our place in the world. And I think that's something that we have to really make sure we look at for the future.
Wayne, what are you seeing? You're in there in the political trenches, interviewing folks, man on the street sort of things. Well, what's your perspective on the national race?
I saw the Republican Party of Hawaii just grow like 50%. I mean, there were so many people joining the Republican Party, and unlike conventional wisdom, they voted for Donald Trump. And on the Bernie Sanders side, like 23,000 young people, not only millennials, but Generation X people like Marcus Oshiro, and they were all supporting Bernie Sanders. And you walk to his headquarters at Ward Warehouse, and it was like exciting, pizza everywhere. It was totally charged. It was a charged atmosphere.
So do you think it's going to be a close presidential race here in Hawaii?
I think all the traditional Democrats are still supporting Hillary. I think, that's where their allegiance lies, John Hawai'i and company. And I think if they take Bernie Sanders off the ballot, I don't know if the kids will show up and really vote for Hillary. I don't see that.
What is it about Donald Trump? I mean, he just has this thing for really upsetting people, but then it also strikes a different chord where people are supporting him at the same time.
I don't know what the appeal is. It must be name recognition above all. But he's a person that, he never held elective office, and he says whatever he wants. And for some people, like, gee, I wish I could do that. I wish I could not be politically correct. And I think that really hit some people who are really dissatisfied with the status quo right now.
Spencer, does that resonate with college students?
I think I agree with Wayne, to some extent that it does, I think, reach voters in this sort of way that, he is a shocking candidate.
But he's talking about Muslims, he's talking about women, he's talking about terrorists in a certain way that no one has talked about before.
Right. And I think because of that, he's breaking these traditional barriers of politics. And I think very much so that 2016, maybe unlike 2008, is really the year of the political outsider. And that's what I've been sort of hearing a lot is, these are candidates who, you mentioned it to a pundit in 2008, a 74-year-old Jewish socialist and a mogul who has never held political office. And you say that those two candidates would get so much traction in the 2016 race, and you would have been laughed out the room. No one would have believed you. And so, this year, it is sort of, touching this chord of people are not happy with the way things are moving, and we want to, take it in a different direction. And I think what Donald Trump has done so far is to prove himself sort of a candidate that's willing to break through sort of the regular politics, the red tape of it all, and just say, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I know, and this is how I am going to lead the country into whatever era we'll see from a Donald Trump presidency.
Right. If you were to make a prediction for the millennials, they're, again, speaking for all millennials, sorry, Spencer, the 18 to 34-year-old set, do you think they'll come to the next election, and who will they finally support for the president?
I think there's also a lot of issue that a lot of people take with the sort of two-party system. We have seen Democrats and Republicans control the entire sort of political spectrum for a very long time. And, so I think in this upcoming election, maybe not here so much as nationally, you're going to see candidates like Gary Johnson of the Libertarian Party, Dr. Jill Stein of the Green Party start to gain more traction among voters who want another option that's not Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. That's not necessarily to say that they aren't qualified candidates, but that they maybe in some voters' eyes, and especially millennial voters' eyes, not really the best candidate.
Tim, do you think that the reaction to Donald Trump actually might benefit the Democrats? Because
I certainly do.
they're just getting so fired up.
I certainly do, and I think I would thank David for that as well, and the Republican Party, because I think as many people who are fired up for Bernie Sanders and are fired up for what looks to be our first female nominee for the Democratic Party, we're also so turned off. Not only by Donald Trump, but by the entire field that the Republicans put forth this time, which seems so out of touch, I think, to young people who are struggling, living paycheck to paycheck, to be touting trickle-down economics, which has been proven to have utterly failed, to millennials who are in that situation, burdened by student debt. It just doesn't resonate with young people. And now with Donald Trump, and I would actually draw a distinction between the outsider that Donald Trump is and the outsider that Bernie Sanders is, in so much as Donald Trump, in his rhetoric about people of different races and religious affiliation and sexual orientation, those are pretty far out on the fringe. Whereas Bernie Sanders is articulating a position that has been more in line with the core values of Democrats. He's always caucused with the Democrats before he formally became a Democrat. For this election, I think there's a lot more differences in our platform. What he's actively trying to move in a more progressive direction, a more New Deal direction, but there's a lot more differences, I think, between those on the Republican side, and a lot more in common, I think, between our Democratic candidates.
Interesting, and I know always strong feelings, like we talk about Donald Trump, and there was an interesting article that a lot of traditional Democrats were going to vote for Donald Trump, and it was fascinating where even though we've had an increase of jobs, and I know that President Obama says that, hey, we've got these jobs that came back, the wage increase hasn't come with it. So we see a lot of families having to work 2 or 3 jobs just to maintain that wage growth. And regardless of what people think, I think Trump has had that business experience of, okay, I've had to build businesses. I know that some of them have not done as well, but he's overcome them. And that's something to respect in the sense of when you're down and out and you're having a difficult situation, sometimes you could stumble through success, but having to learn from failure and coming back. And that's why I think a lot of people have admired that grit that he's had to say, wow, you know what, he was billions of dollars in debt. People thought he was out, and he'd come back and in some cases been creating jobs. And regardless of what people think of him, I think what people see from the outside is, do we want just politicians who know the system, who know how to play the game, or an outsider to come in and say, okay, let's bring a fresh set of eyes, a fresh perspective of a can-do type of attitude?
I would actually respectfully disagree. Government is not a business. And President Roosevelt said, the test of our progress is not whether we add more abundance to those who have much, but whether we do enough and provide enough for those who have too little. And we've seen since 2008 Wall Street out of control, completely unregulated. And to insinuate that Bernie Sanders supporters or Hillary Clinton supporters or any Democrat would cross to vote for a billionaire, someone that's so out of touch, repeatedly bankrupt, and who has used that rigged system, I think it's ridiculous.
Well, it certainly makes a reporter's life really interesting because every day there's something new to report.
There is, and we should also look at the Libertarian Party, We have Gary Johnson, the former governor of New Mexico, and his running mate, William Weld, who's the former governor of Massachusetts. The first time ever we've had two former governors on the same ticket for any party. And I think balancing the Libertarians, the Democrats, as well as the Republicans, it gives people a choice. And that is something that is refreshing, at least in this election.
Let's take a look at some of our local races and start off with the congressional races right now. Wayne, is there anything exciting in these races?
I don't know that there'll be any surprises. I think Tulsi Gabbard is guaranteed a re-election. I think Colleen Hanabusa, who's running against a really unknown field, I think she will win. And I think Senator Brian Schatz, he's got his race done already, I think. So there are no surprises per se, but I think the people that turn out for Colleen Hanabusa are going to really change the demographics of the elections locally. And I think everyone's wondering, now Colleen Hanabusa will draw about 115,000 people to vote for her, even in the primary. And what will that do to the mayoral race in Honolulu? What will that do for other races in the State House and the State Senate?
I mean, she has a lot of name recognition. We see her on the news every night speaking about the rail project. Le'ahu Isa also has some name recognition as well. Let's take a look at the Tulsi Gabbard race. A little bit of a firework in terms of one of her opponents saying that she's refusing to make appearances. I mean, that's kind of normal politics, isn't it?
Well, she did that during the last race with William Crowley. She never debated him, although he begged her many times. But I think when you're that much of a front runner, why chance it? I mean, why even give the acknowledgement that there's someone that can really come up with better ideas than you when you're that far ahead?
David, on the Republican side, I know you get asked this time and time again. Where are the strong Republican candidates?
And I think Hawaii definitely, we're the only state in the country that has had a kingdom, right? A palace. And we have Shirlene Colonel. She's been retired for 30 years in the Air Force. Shirlene Ostroff, who's running for Congress. And as Wayne mentioned, unknown. But one of the things that I do want to see, and I still continue to hope for, is a balanced system. Regardless if you're Democrat, Republican, if one party is in control for too long, you're going to have some issues pop up. And I do want to encourage, and I think it's a matter of, is it the numbers, or, and I know we're going to cover it later tonight, is it just that people don't show up to vote? And we always have the lowest voter turnout in the country. And I believe that if we do get more people involved, we will see a more balanced system. But it's just a matter of getting that message out and really supporting our candidates. And I think that as the years go by and people see Hawaii has the highest cost of living, and it's been that way. And we'll talk about the rail, but $5 billion, now it's $7 billion, and we're going to stop at Middle Street. Whether you're for or against the rail, I think we just had a very big, things have not been managed well, and I think we need a change of leadership in that regard.
You know, there was a time when Linda Lingle was elected as governor, and people thought that the pundits all said there was going to be this Linda Lingle train, and then people were going to ride on her coattails. So what happened?
No, I mean, I think that a lot of people always say that, okay, you know what, she's a one-hit wonder or anything, and I know her well. She did what she could. I think she did a fantastic job in really galvanizing people. During her election, we had people going to jail, Democrats, because of breaking the law, and that's what happens when one party isn't for too long. And when she came in, we saw Hawaii became, I think it was like bottom, late 40s on economic growth up until the teens. So we saw under her administration, Hawaii grow significantly. And I think that when we look at overall those that have come out to vote and support Republicans, we just need to get more voter turnout and get people excited about the process. And I think that's important. And I know a lot of Republicans that understand, hey, you know what, voter turnout isn't that great. And so it's easier if I run as a Democrat, even if I hold Republican ideals. And even when I was running as Republican, I had a lot of prominent Democrats saying, you know what, Dave, Democrats here are like Republicans in the mainland, so just come on over to our side and you're going to win your race guaranteed. And so I think that's an issue right off the bat that we need to address.
Let's take a look at the races for Hawaii County Mayor. Obviously, the big name there is Harry Kim. Everybody knows Harry Kim. He was obviously former mayor of Hawaii County, and then also, you know, the man seen as the voice of reason as head of civil defense. Wayne, do you think this is going to be a shoo-in for Harry Kim?
I think Harry Kim still has a lot of name recognition. I think he still draws a lot of people to his side. I mean, they still see him as the civil defense administrator, Harry Kim, since 1986, watching the lava flow go over Kapoho and all those disasters that hit the Big Island. So I think if there are big surprises, I don't see it. I see him winning.
I mean, he doesn't even spend any money on advertising. I mean, you see him with these little handwritten signs and that sort of thing. You talk to folks from the Big Island, though, and some of them, you know, he does have his detractors, and some have said that, you know, Harry Kim tends to be more Hilo-centric, whereas Billy Kinoe was more for other parts of the island. Do you think we'll see separations between, let's say, the Hilo voters and the Kona voters?
I think there's always a separation between the Hilo and the Kona voters, but I think, you know, we've gone through a lot of changes on the Kona side. There's a big transient community there. All the people that were there when Harry Kim was mayor are probably, many are gone already. So he can reach out, I think, because of the new highway that goes over Mauna Kea, and he can go to the other side a lot easier. So I think, you know, barring any surprises, I think he has a good chance of winning.
Perhaps one of the more exciting local races is the race for Honolulu mayor. We have Kirk Caldwell being challenged by Peter Carlisle and Charles DeJew. Spencer, what are your thoughts on the local mayor's race here in Honolulu?
You know, I think it's, I'm a little worried. And the reason I say that is because, you know, to us, some of us at least, it really seems like it's sort of become this referendum on rail. You know, you sort of have to pick a mayor who's going to do whatever he says he's going to do about rail. And that's sort of, you know, the topic that people are seizing on, that it's going to be this sort of topic that makes or breaks the candidates when we go into the primary and, you know, of course, the election. And so when you take a look at the mayoral race, you know, I think the concern there is, you know, it's 4 years in office. And is this mayor who we're going to elect, is he only going to focus on rail for 4 years? And the answer is obviously no. There are other things that are going to happen. And so I think, you know, if there's an opportunity for people to start, you know, questioning all of the candidates on, you know, what else is happening? What else are you going to do as mayor to address the issues that are not only important and pertinent to, you know, 2016 election, but important and pertinent, I think, to the up-and-coming generation of millennials who really want to get politically active but don't necessarily see candidates who excite them or, you know, make them want to say, this is the man who is going to take us to Washington, you know, and so that's it.
So, Tim, do you think it's going to be a referendum on rail? Because obviously Kirk Caldwell, Peter Carlisle, supporters of the rail project, Charles DeJew, now, you know, the anti-rail candidate, if you want to call him that. Do you think it'll come down to rail?
There's a good chance it will. It's certainly an interesting dynamic in that race. You know, the party's platform, since it is a nonpartisan race, is that we won't take a formal position and respect, you know, the will of the voters who set it up that way. And we haven't made any changes in that regard. So it's tough to say, but as, you know, as far as the general election goes, I think that's an exception. That race is an exception. The general, I think, will be where most of the action is. But by and large, most of the action is going to be in the Democratic primaries, right, for our local races. That's where the energy is. That's where the ideas are. And we've got some really interesting races there.
Well, it certainly raised eyebrows when Democratic former Governor Ben Cayetano came out and supported Charles DeJew.
And he's got a lot of union support, too. So private unions, public sector unions have support Charles. And it's exciting because he's held office as a city council person. So he has experience there as a former congressman. And so I think he brings a very wide level of experience to the mayor's race. And I know that a lot of times it's going to be, we're talking about referendum on rail or not. I think ultimately it becomes a referendum on the leadership ability to execute. And again, whether you're for or against rail, I live in Milani-Mauka, so I'm stuck in that traffic quite a bit. So I want to see good, solid solutions to our problem, because we do have one. And I think saying for or against doesn't necessarily help the situation. It's looking at, okay, what are our options? What is our budget? What is it that we can do? And our audit that came out in April really just chastised the current administration on not planning properly, not having the operational maintenance expenses on there. And Charles has put a really good plan together. And he was the first to come out to say, you know what, let's go ahead and look at stopping a Middle Street merge. Let's get our budget down. Let's go ahead and make sure we have good options moving forward, because if it just stops at Middle Street, I mean, is that going to really help us? And so that's why I think having good solutions like what Charles has brought forth is very important to the mayor's race.
Wayne, how do you see things shaping up?
What surprises me is that we passed a city charter in 2011 that took the executive branch out of the rail business. We created this Honolulu Authority for Rapid Transportation, and now the candidates are all trying to lead this charge, and yet it's not within their purview. They don't have the power to really determine one way or another how this thing is going to go. So I don't know, maybe they can't help it. I mean, they just can't help it.
They can't help it.
It's in their DNA. They have to lead. But I find it really interesting that they would take such a stand and try to lead the charge up the hill to rail.
Well, please remember to call, email, or tweet your questions and comments. We will be responding to some of the questions that you've sent in just in a few minutes. But first, let's hear from Hawaii residents about which issues they think are the most important in the eyes of Hawaii's electorate.
Well, I think they need to work on the homeless issue. That seems to be a pretty constant and nagging issue. And the infrastructure, as a person that lives here, it looks like the infrastructure could use some attention. And how do you do that and still have a solvent budget? It's beyond me.
I don't want you to think that I'm speaking on behalf of any of the micronations. These are my personal opinions. As a micronation who's living Hawaii, even I struggle. But I think the most important thing that the leaders need to address is understanding.
Definitely climate change and renewable energy, and encouraging more renewable energy use.
Oh, and the cost of living, education, healthcare. I think those are the local issues. I think those are important.
For me personally, peace, world peace, staying out of wars. That's a real big one for me. And locally, the elections, locally, I would imagine that the without disclosing my opinion on it, I think the rail issue is probably very pivotal for a lot of people.
They say they have built affordable homes, and middle class and lower still have a hard time buying those, so how can you, it's not affordable to the greater population.
And let's not forget the issue of the hot classrooms. As we get closer and closer to the end of January, the beginning of August, the parents are going to get really upset about those hot classrooms. Wayne, your thoughts on some of those big issues and how that'll affect people's voting habits?
I see the cost of living. I heard cost of living as a big issue, homelessness. Our generation, the baby boomers, inherited this general excise tax, and instead of doing nothing, they raised it, and they haven't gotten rid of this most repressive tax system that we have. And I think that's bearing hard on the poor millennials. Now let's hope this generation gets it and changes our tax base into something where it enhances our ability to live with this high cost of living.
Spencer, your thoughts? There's paying tuition, and a lot of your classmates, I'm sure, still living with parents, trying to find affordable housing.
Right, I'm sure a lot of people are thankful for Obamacare and letting people stay on their parents' health plans until age 26, because it is an issue living in your parents' home because you're forced to. And that is mainly because you can't afford things, and a lot of things are very expensive, especially here in the state of Hawaii, because of that high cost of living. And so I think, this is an issue that will continue to affect people, because I think, there's some national solutions that are sort of coming down from the federal government that don't really address, our local scene, our local arena. And that's because, they're looking at, typical situations in the state of California or typical situations in the state of Washington. They're not looking at Hawaii where we do face a lot, and I really do mean a lot of issues that have to do with things that no other state will see. And whether that, is because of our majority Asian population, and so sort of looking at those issues more, or whether it's because we don't have winter, that there are different issues we take a look at, like hot classrooms all throughout the year, that classrooms on the mainland will just never have to sort of deal with.
I want to get to some of the viewer questions, and this question comes in from someone, and I'm just going to read it straight. They say, they call Rod Tam Lightning Rod because of all the stupid things that he's gotten caught doing. Why on earth would the Republican Party be so happy to see him come on board with them?
I don't know. I don't
David?
think it's a matter of being happy or unhappy. I think it's just a matter of como mai, welcome. I think everyone deserves a second chance, and it's important that we continue to look to grow our party, get people excited, and I know that sometimes we make mistakes, but I encourage everybody that just because what's happened in the past, it doesn't have to dictate what's going to happen in the future. And so I think it's always about matter of getting more people involved, and regardless of what has happened.
Senate race, so Senate District 13, we have Carl Rhodes, who's a 10-year veteran of the State House of Representatives. We have Kim Koko Iwamoto, and then we have this young guy named Keone Nakoa. And I think the voters there in Senate District 13 haven't had a vote for a new senator for 20 years, and I think that's exciting that they have such a choice. One boomer, one millennial, and one Generation X. So
let's talk about the East Honolulu race between Sam Sloan and now Councilman Stanley Chang. What do you make of that race and what's going on there?
Well, first and foremost, it's a Democrat, unopposed, I believe, that is running against a Republican. And so these are races that we as a party can get right out in front and say, here's your clear choice. However, it's a pretty conservative district, as I believe David had mentioned off camera. And on the other hand, Stanley Chang he walks his district, and he does it quite aggressively. And so he understands that door-to-door communication, door knocking, is the way to win elections. So it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out. Historically, that's obviously gone Republican for quite a while.
Right. It is a Republican district, and Sam Sloan has been experiencing some health problems recently.
Right. So he can't walk as much, but he has the experience. And out of 25 state senators, it's unfortunate, but we only have one Republican. And that imbalance, I think, is very unhealthy for our state, even with Sam's health. And I'm sure if he saw this plethora of Republican candidates, would he step aside? I'm not sure, but I think it's important that we don't want that experience to be lost just because he can't go door to door yet because of his health issues. So I wish him the best, and I do hope that we're able to at least have that minority party, that Lone Ranger, he likes to call himself.
I would say that race is kind of an example of one of the few that's really contested. Again, the energy and the action is in the primaries. And one thing you can say about the presidential election and how it's affected the primary races is it's inspired a lot of people not only to get involved in the political process, but also to run for office. And so you see some of the younger folks, millennials, Gen X candidates that are sticking with it after the caucus and staying with the party. And we're a party that can have that debate, right? Whether it's at the presidential level, whether it's at our senatorial district level, between very dynamic and diverse candidates, we're going to be stronger on the other side. We're going to come out of this debate much stronger. I'm not sure that that's the case right now for the Republican Party, even locally. 5 or 6 members of the House and don't seem to get along very well. So again, the general election, be it as it may, Hawaii voters have said overwhelmingly for a number of years that they choose the vision and the ideals of the Democratic Party. So the primary races, I think, is the main focus for our party right now. And of course, once we move past the primary, we'll know who's to support in the fall.
Wayne, in your career as a political journalist, you've seen upsets. And do these upsets happen because, let's say, voters don't like a candidate, or maybe just the candidate worked harder? Or is it everything under the sun?
Well, let's look at the race between Governor Neil Abercrombie and David Ige. Yeah. Was it a vote for David Ige, or was it a vote against Governor Neil Abercrombie? And those cases, like Bernard Akana on the Big Island, who upset Mayor Dante Carpenter, all those upsets were based on not a vote for the candidate, but a vote against one candidate. So, it's really
And I do want to mention, my wife, my lovely wife. Got to mention her, of course, right?
Full disclosure.
Yeah, exactly. The House Minority Leader, Beth Fukumoto-Cheng, Milani Mauka, and she beat Marilyn Lee, who her and her husband had that seat for almost 3 decades, and has become one of the few Republicans ever to have knocked down an incumbent Democrat in Hawaii. And so there are upsets, and I think a lot of it is hard work. She has very great ideas, and she's been known, and we always talk about this, if you're criticized on the right and the left, maybe you are doing something right? So we could see that she's worked hard, and one of the few Republicans to have actually passed bills with the governor assigned. And I think that's very exciting, that especially when we're talking about the millennials, party politics, partisanship, is not as important as in getting stuff done and looking towards the future. And that's one of the reasons why I'm very optimistic about the future, because it's not about, are you Democrat or Republican? It's about what is it that we can do to make our country and state better. And our state has consistently had the highest cost of living, and we need to address that, definitely.
One of our viewers, Lou, said, here in Hawaii, the Democratic Party should be ashamed. They control all of elected offices, but what do they really do for the common man? Tim, I'll have to let you, answer that. I mean, do you hear that when just talking to everyday people and when they ask, what is the Democratic Party really doing for us?
I've heard some frustration. I think there's a gulf that's grown between the party itself and some of our elected officials. I mean, we are a big tent party. There's a broad array of different mindsets and ideologies that are within the Democratic Party. You've got business Democrats, you've got more progressive Democrats. But where else but the Democratic Party will you find a social safety net for our kupuna? Where else but the Democratic Party will you find a party that's willing to fight for organized labor and for working people, and to stand up for the rights of our brothers and sisters in the LGBT community? So I wouldn't agree with that particular analysis, but there's always more work to be done as a party, and that's what we mean to do right now. There's a lot of work to do, but we're going to do it unified, and we're going to do it stronger for the debate, and we'll come out and be ready for the fall.
Well, voter turnout can play a major role in any election. In 1992, when Bill Clinton ran against incumbent George H.W. Bush, the voter turnout in Hawaii hit an all-time high. 382,000 Hawaii voters cast a ballot, which represented about 82% of all registered voters. Well, 22 years later, Hawaii hit an all-time low for voter turnout in the 2014 general election. 52% of all registered voters showed up to vote, and that dismal turnout landed Hawaii in last place nationally. So why are people not voting?
I think there's probably a lot of apathy, or I think people think it's just the same old politicians getting elected into office. So I don't think people really believe that their voices are heard.
Well, I would like to see a lot more impartiality when it comes to dealing with the subjects and quit doing the left versus right thing, black versus white thing, or whatever you want to call it. A little bit more fact-driven decision-making and not so tied directly to a particular party. And I would love to see that more. And that gets disheartening to the average, I suspect, to the average voter.
There's an apathy that I find really discouraging, and I personally don't understand it because I think there are a lot of very compelling issues we need to all be active in.
We don't have the power. The politicians are all grouped together, yeah.
They don't trust government, and so they don't care who's voted, because they're not going to keep their promises, you know, and so they've given up. They've given up hope on electing anybody.
Spencer, I wanted to ask you, obviously you have your circle of colleagues at the Kaleo newspaper, but then you have other colleagues and classmates who are just average students. Do you think they're going to vote in the upcoming elections?
You know, I think that's a difficult question to answer. I can't speak necessarily for everyone. You know, I would encourage people to vote, but I think the issues here, you know, you're talking about turnout in 2014 being the absolute lowest for us. And I think that, you know, very much sort of led to the rise of candidates like Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, people who were willing to, like I said before, cut through this red tape of establishment politics that people are getting tired of. You know, Congress is suffering from, you know, this really, really low approval rating. I think it's about 8%, something like that, because they're not doing anything. You know, it's situations where Mitch McConnell cries when there's a bill that's getting passed because it's like a hallelujah miracle day in Congress. And you know, that's sort of ridiculous that, you know, these are people who are getting paid over $100,000 a year to do what? And so I think that, you know, in order to encourage this sort of voter turnout, to discourage this sort of apathy, is to take a look at, you know, like David said, you know, take a look at the issues. And, you know, we need to see candidates who are actively willing to do something, not just say, oh, well, the Republicans do this, the Democrats do this. It's the Democrats' fault, it's the Republicans' fault. You know, we are looking at sort of, you know, the return of the talk of, I don't know when it was, 8 years ago or so, maybe, when, you know, politicians were touting, you know, I can reach across the aisle, I can do bipartisan this, this, and that, you know, and those were things that, you know, Hawaii politicians were saying in their ads, and then all of a sudden it disappeared. And I think it's going to have to, I think, come back in order to encourage people, not only, you know, young people, but also people who just feel like they don't have a voice, that they do, and that issues are going to be acted upon.
Yeah. Wayne, I remember the pundits after Barack Obama was elected president, you know, everyone said that there was going to be a wave of new voters and more people coming to the polls, and it just didn't happen.
It didn't materialize, but, you know, the millennials, to their credit, started the movement way back in 2002 when Tulsi Gabbard won the House District 49 seat at the age of 21. So there is a transition. I think they're doing it. But as far as voter apathy, I don't think it's all apathy. I remember interviewing one millennial mom. She's running with a 4-year-old, 7:30 in the morning, and I said, oh, can I talk to you about the election? She said, I don't know the issues. I don't know what's happening. All I know is I got to take this girl to school, and they're so busy trying to keep ahead of this cost of living. It's not apathy. They just don't have the energy or the time.
And you know, that's a good point. I mean, there's a lot of people out there, they're just trying to put food on the table. They're just trying to get their kids to school. They're just trying to go to work and make a decent living. Is there any way to overcome those issues to actually get people to the polls, Tim?
We have to find creative ways to make politics relevant in people's lives, to show them how these issues affect them, and make our politics more inclusive, not just, you know, as a party, but our elected officials and our government in general, I think, needs to make politics more inclusive. But it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Your elected officials aren't as responsive if you're not involved. And when you're more involved, typically government is more responsive. When the people lead, leaders will follow, that whole thing. So I believe it. I absolutely believe it. And I would say, just to a point that that Spencer made, again, the reason that these two candidates, relative outsiders, have been popular, I don't think, you can really equate the reasoning behind the two. I think one, Donald Trump is coming from a place of fear, mostly. And I think Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton are coming from a place of hope and ideas. So, it's really what people buy into and what they're willing to believe and hold elected officials accountable for.
Well, every election, it seems like Scott Nago and his team at the Office of Elections try to eliminate another barrier that may prevent a potential voter from exercising the right to cast a ballot. So Scott Nago gave us an update on the latest ways registering and actually voting are more convenient than ever.
One of the new features we have this year is online voter registration. So anybody with a driver's license or state ID can register online, as well as request a permanent absentee ballot, and other features like find your polling place and see a sample ballot prior to going to vote. Starting with our absentee walk sites, anybody who's not registered 30 days prior to the election can actually go and vote, register at the EV walk sites and vote on that day. And in 2018, you can do that at the polling places on election day.
So wow, what a concept. Registering on the day that you're voting. Is that a good thing for the party, Dave?
No, I think it can be, especially because what we see is a lot of sometimes one-issue voters, or they vote because they like a certain candidate or not. What I want to always encourage and make sure, we want to have as many people to get vote as possible, but also make sure that voter fraud is something that we address. That has been a big concern where people did go to jail in previous elections because of trying to register people that were not citizens or were not legal. And so I think it's very important that we make sure that we look at the big picture of encouraging people to vote and at the same time prevent any type of fraud that has been abused in the past.
But fraud is almost non-existent. It's been proven to be almost non-existent. And when you open up the doors of government, it's a good thing for democracy, making the process, again, inclusive and convenient. But that's only part of it. Something I would be remiss not to mention is the role of money in our politics. And one of the big differences between the two Democratic candidates was the way they funded their campaign. And I think that, when you speak in terms of revolution or a movement, I think that will continue on. At least on the Democratic side, even in light of Citizens United, which may or may not be overturned in our next Supreme Court. The role of money in politics is something I think that lends to a lot of the apathy on the part of voters and the general public, regardless of party affiliation.
Edwina from Wahiawa has a question for you, David. And she says she wants to know what people outside of the country are saying about Donald Trump, and specifically China, she said, because you just went on a trip from there.
Sure.
So what are folks internationally saying?
I think they're always entertained by our U.S. politics, especially in China, because they don't have a full-fledged democracy like we do. Regardless if they like a candidate or not, there is that sense of admiration of the United States becoming a great country and a lot of respect for what we do. Even though we are, in some cases, they see as competition, I think they understand that it is our democracy of our ability to elect the candidates that we want that has gotten us to where we are at. And so I think more or less people are always curious and interested, and they are always awaiting on election day what's going to happen, because we do really, in many cases, if you use the term, the light on a hill, and many people see the United States as okay, what's going to happen next, and I think it affects their lives as well.
Cameron from Manoa wants to know about the race in the Manoa district between Dale Kobayashi and Isaac Choi.
That's an interesting one. District 23. You have two Democrats, and the decision will be made on primary day, and one candidate will lose. Dale Kobayashi, who's the son of Ann Kobayashi, council member Ann Kobayashi. So he's got name recognition in the district. Isaac Choi, he's spent about 8 years in the House of Representatives. He took over after Kirk Caldwell. Isaac is a CPA by profession. Dale Kobayashi is a finance advisor. So they have very similar viewpoints on how to fix the broken University of Hawaii financial system. So I think they have very similar ideas.
That's an interesting race as well, because it's a little different than some of the other Democratic primary races, which might be decisions based on a newbie versus an incumbent, or somebody that's been around in politics for a while, or perhaps a new progressive candidate versus a more business-oriented Democrat, or more conservative Democrat. The Manoa race, that particular district, is more of an issues-oriented race, right? So you have one issue, Paradise Park, a development issue, where Isaac Choi comes down, and as far as my understanding goes, in support of that development in the back of the valley. Dale Kobayashi is against that development. And also a national issue, gun control, is also evidently at play in that race. So that's a very interesting race, issues-oriented wise. It's a little bit different than some of the others.
What about the issue of raising the tuition at UH Manoa? People like to claim that one candidate is going to raise the tuition, but
that's hard to
where
say.
do they stand?
Full disclaimer, I'm absolutely against it, being a student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa at the law school, but that's tough, because I don't know that it necessarily comes down to one particular candidate. That's a pretty complex argument there.
And I think both candidates have a plan, and they want to really address the top-heavy administration that runs the whole UH system, and they think that needs to be addressed separately from tuition, separately from academics and sports. It should focus on that big, humongous little administration that they have at UH.
Well, Spencer, your thoughts on that? I mean, a lot of those top administrators make some big time bucks, but the administration will say, you need to attract top talent.
Yeah, I think there is some sort of a legitimate argument there that in order to attract this sort of top talent, you need money. But there is a concern, and Kaleo has run a bunch of pieces, about the sort of exorbitant amounts of money that they're being paid. We're looking at deans of the med school, the law school, even Norm Chow, the football coach, being paid over $500,000. And so to look at that and think, I get paid $10.10 an hour for work, on the university campus, and where is sort of that money, that tuition going? We're seeing problems with some of the buildings on campus. The education department had to move or relocate their department to another building, move their classes, and in buildings like Snyder Hall are sort of falling into disrepair. There are a lot of issues on campus, and to sort of see, how much money administrators are getting paid, and then sort of seeing the follow-up of things not being completed when they originally promised to complete things, that's an issue. And so for us, it's an issue that really hits home, because what we're seeing is this sort of bureaucracy that's getting in the way of progress on our campus.
A question from Carol of Kaneohe, and she wants to know from you, David Chang, why did the Republican Party here allow such appalling treatment of the House Minority Leader?
Yeah, that's my wife. I think politics is such an emotional beast. Regardless if you're on the right or left, sometimes people vote with the pocketbooks. Sometimes people vote with what do they truly feel on a particular issue. And we talked about it, Spencer and I talked about how some of the younger generation aren't as political, right, left. It's a matter of what can we do to get the job done. And Beth has done a great job of reaching across the aisle, of passing bills, of getting a lot of great ideas presented. And sometimes, and this goes, I think, for both parties, just consorting with the opposite party is a sign that you are not a true member of your party. And I think that's just what happens when politics takes hold. So she's a grown woman, and she took in stride, and actually it helped her out because it got her national coverage, and she was ranked top 40 under 40 in America with the Asian politics. So, it was an opportunity for her.
And that Republican in name only label, it was given to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a generational thing too, because your wife is more collaborative. Mm-hmm. She works with the Democrats. And like the older Republicans, it's like take no prisoners. Let them let them die on the vine and let's just roll them over. So it's a different way of dealing with the issues and dealing with politics at the state capitol.
And Spencer, do you see that as it's an age thing, that younger politicians, even just younger people in general, more willing to work collaboratively instead of this is my party and that's your party?
Agreed. The biggest political group now is independents. It's not Democrats, it's not Republicans. It's the independent group of voters. And I think that's because, we can't afford to be stuck in this obstructionist deadlock of Congress, or even bringing that down to the local level. We just can't afford that anymore. We can't afford to wait. We can't afford to fight on things. We just need to get things done because the issues that are affecting us today are, in a sense, time sensitive. That's why we had something like the Paris talks where we talked about climate change. So many nations gathered together to pass an accord historically, on something like an issue of climate change. And that's the sort of action that our generation is fond of, because it's about getting things done. It's about ignoring the sort of political nonsense of it's the other party's fault, it's their fault, I'm not going to deal with it, it's their problem, and sort of saying, well, you know what? Republican, Democrat, Independent, Green, Libertarian, whatever you are, we're all human, we're all people, and we all face the same issues every single day. And that has nothing to do with party affiliation, it has nothing to do with where you are in life. We all face a lot of similar issues. And so, the concern of younger generations is, if you look at something, for instance, like the Brexit vote, younger people were saying, this is a choice we have to live with. Mm-hmm. And a choice we have to live with for much longer than, some of the older voters. And so, it is a concern about the future that I think is driving a lot of this sort of attitude that David was talking about.
Well, I wanted to thank all of you for being guests tonight. It's been really a lively and insightful conversation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, next week on Insights on PBS Hawaii, we continue our coverage of election 2016. How can politics and small business intersect to strengthen and stabilize Hawaii's economy? The Aloha State shows up in national polls with some of the worst ratings for small business-friendly environments. What's being done to turn this around? We'll hear from small business owners and state lawmakers. Please join us next week for Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Mahealani Richardson. Ahui ho.